right, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session entitled Generating and Managing Structured Reusable Data Tables for Data-Driven Submissions. Today's presentation is going to be presented by David Cronin, founder of Cognition. We'll introduce David in just a moment here. We go to the next slide. Before we do that, I want to take a moment and just kind of introduce the audience here to Asterix. If you've not participated in any of our webinars in the past, we welcome you. If you're a returning visitor or webinars, thanks for coming back. We appreciate that. And just in terms of who Asterix is, real quick, we go to that next slide. Yep, the previous one. I'm sorry, David. Yep.
Sorry about that. That was me.
No worries, no worries. So in terms of who Asterix is as a company, we are a consulting company. We typically work in the technology sector within life sciences, and that encompasses a lot of different technologies, everything from lab informatics systems to ERP systems to analytics, and a wide array of different technologies that exist in R&D departments. We were established in 1995. We're not aligned to any one vendor, so we're not, dedicated to this vendor or that vendor. We're agnostic. We try to work closely with customers to pick the best technology solutions based on, what we know about them. We operate from the US and overseas and have over 1,200 employees, greater than 90% of which hold advanced science degrees. That's something we're very proud of here. And our headquarters are in beautiful Red Bank, New Jersey. The type of companies that we work with and help, everybody from startups to Fortune 1000, life science enterprises, chemical, CPG, basically anybody that has, an R&D presence or a laboratory is somebody that could benefit from the services that Asterix puts out. And we go to the next slide. And those services, just in terms of what we're doing, is there is an end-to-end service offering. We like to say that we have services that accelerate digital transformation and optimize performance across your ecosystem. That's going to be everything from the very beginning when we are working with companies to help with strategic innovation and enterprise architecture. That's really defining, everything from business process to user requirements to application roadmaps, et cetera, to, designing the architecture and the data architecture and the solution architecture of what your technology stack and R&D is going to look like. From there, we can help you select different technologies through RFP development, facilitation of vendor demos, et cetera, basically help run the process of evaluating software. It's something that we're particularly good at. And then from there, we could help with development and implementation of the systems if it's applicable. When those systems are completed, we can then do computer system validation against those systems and provide ongoing application support. Rounding it out, we do have a full staffing division of Asterix where we can staff both R&D personnel, which would have nothing to do with the technology, or we can staff technology experts to help run your systems. So that's a little bit about our services. From here on out, I would like to take a moment and introduce David Cronin. So we can go to the next slide, David, and then just tell you a little bit about David. I'll pass the controls to him and I'll sit back and kind of enjoy the presentation with the rest of you. David is a founder at Cognition Corporation. He's worked over 30 years in life science industry, the last 25 helping IT data science models that combine internally structured data items, connections, deliverables for pharmaceutical and med device submissions. So I won't go through and step on your toes, David, on your background. I'll pass it off to you and you can finish this up and take the presentation from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Yes, David Cronin here from Cognition. Most of my experience for early part of my career was all med device, supporting product development teams, systems engineering teams. Over the last 8 years, I've been involved more and more in pharmaceutical. And one of the things that I've noticed is that even though both of those industries have different data sets and different submission vehicles and formats, there are certain similarities, that they face, similar challenges, the regulated environment, lots of data, sometimes complex, connected in different ways, need to make a lot of different reports and outputs. And what I've learned is that taking a approach of what I call internally structured data items can be advantageous for many reasons. So today I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, kind of tease out what I mean by internally structured data and how I think that can be a vehicle to speed submissions, speed the time to revenue, reduce errors, etc. So this is my only painful, dense slide. I apologize, but just want to give you some of the observations that I've been seeing from the pharmaceutical perspective here. Very good at storing data, lots of different source systems, lots of ways to put numbers and words away. not always so good at using that data in a very nimble way to solve some of the complex problems required, like critical quality attribute, or just how are the batches going, or what are my trends in stability, things like that. Not always quite as nimble as they would like to be, even though they're great at storing a lot of data. A lot of the data I come across is not necessarily well structured. Some is well structured, but a lot of times it's not well structured in such a way to support these complex filings, full BLA or tech transfer internally, or ramping up from batch to commercialization, annual reporting, things like that. What I've been seeing reported pretty consistently to me is 15 to 20% of CMC resource is all in just trying to get reports together, right? And that's a pretty big chunk of time. And what I see even worse is that that number is actually really higher than that due to the rework, that I have to do data verification and I always find errors and I have to resubmit and, and rebuild. So it's this manual creation of these kind of unstructured reports where I see a lot of the problem for CMC reporting. That leads to questions about the chain of custody, who touched what and when. How do we know that this number is the same as the original source number? Data integrity, things like that. There is a desire, I'm noticing more and more, to move away from saying, hey, I need to make a report to go in a dossier, and more towards how can I actually manage the knowledge that I have? And of course, implications are big there as we start to talk about machine learning and AI as well. But even before that, just how do I get a handle on knowing what I have here? And that's not going to fly if I'm just looking at an Excel spreadsheet, right? There's a lot more new products coming. Their pipelines are increasing. A lot of new biotech players out there. I'm seeing complexity in products growing, a lot of combination products over the last few years. A lot of sponsors are now saying, we're going to also have a device team to do our own container. We're going to make our own inhaler instead of farming it out. So what's the intersection of the drug and device, so to speak? The new CAR T type medicines, right? These targeted individual products, that can lead to exponential growth just in batch alone, because if you think about it, that could mean one batch per each patient. So that's another going to be a big pull on rapid, accurate reporting. So time to market we know is important because I want the maximum product life when my clock starts ticking and my revenues. And I spoke to a friend of mine who's a senior scientist at one of the global pharmaceutical sponsors, and this is a literal quote from him about hire a lot of expensive scientists. Maybe not all scientists think they're expensive, but they are, to do science, and they end up spending lots of time in making reports, verifying things, and remaking and fixing errors. And I like to show this picture of me from a couple of years ago about how this guy told me he feels, right? Sometimes I kind of get that sinking feeling of, the problem's not going to get smaller, it's only going to get bigger. So quick little view of a potential way one person may look at a data model for pharmaceutical stuff, thinking mostly CMC stuff here, right? Mainly concentrate today in that bottom middle box, which I would call the analytical side, where you'd have stability and justification and batch and things like that. And the lower right, where I'd have the process side, where I may do my tech transfer or criticality or recipes. The key to this box, though, is all, not only does it have a lot of ovals with things in it, but it has a lot of arrows connecting those things. And that's where the trouble can come if you're not using this truly internally structured data approach. So I just want to give two examples. Let's look at stability reporting. There can be large data sets. What does that mean? Imagine I'm going to produce this drug, maybe small molecule, whatever, I'm going to make this drug. I want to make it in 2 strengths. I'm going to make those 2 strengths in 3 different batches. Maybe it's 3 different locations. For each of those batches, I'm going to do 3 different packaging options. I now have to take samples of all of those and store them away for certain periods of time to do checking at certain time points. I'm going to put those different samples in different storage conditions, and I'm going to run some number of tests on each one of those samples. And I'm going to get a bunch of test results along the way. And what happens is pretty quickly, for something relatively simple like make this drug, that stability report can easily go to 20,000 data points in that one report, that one data table, if you will, right? could be that large. Now, again, small versus large molecule, one report has all storage conditions in it. Another director report may have storage conditions broken out into different tables. But the idea is it could be very big data sets. And someone's going to go through and look at all that and says, is that accurate? If I look at criticality analysis as another simple example, I put this is less than 1%. A table like this could be 1,000 rows long, right? So it's a risk analysis, if you will. And I circled some things in blue just to show you that, hey, I'm looking at this critical process parameter or whatever that may be a cause to impact a critical quality attribute. I'm going to be looking at the impact or severity, if you will. I'm going to be looking at different likelihoods of failure, the probability or the uncertainty. And I may even have certain control strategies in place to help me detect issues. And that you might call it detectability. Sounds like an FMEA from the device world, because it kind of is. And at the end, I may come up with what I call a residual risk or something. And these are all complex analyses that are done for each one of those potential causes on each one of those CQAs. And again, it can get very, very big and very nasty if someone's told that they have to go through and make sure that it was typed right, or if this was updated, that someone approve it and all of that. So this unstructured approach, I call it, leads to a lot of pain. I see it every day. Lots and lots of disparate document types out there with many different people that have to work together, communicate, trade information, share, update, back and forth by many different methods. And this goes on and on for long periods of time. And they may have very good, corporate procedures or SOPs, excellent job aids and work instructions. So they're following those. But because of the unstructured nature of just a bunch of documents, it leads to lots of trouble. It leads to delays. The middle picture of someone sleeping, literally like my eyes are glazing over. I see that a lot. Problems, I got a problem. I got to go back and check that. The image on the lower left, by the way, is an FDA reviewer from probably the late 60s, early 70s. And the only difference today right now is that when people review, instead of having those stacks of pieces of paper, they have a whole bunch of PDFs. It's still the same thing for the most part. Now, there are movements towards getting away from that, right? We'll talk about that a bit later, but that's some of the problems that I see. A lot of these items that people are working with, I'm looking at a specification, if you will, that doesn't just exist in a specification document once in a dossier. That same, pH or whatever is going to be potentially used or referenced over in other chapters of the CTD. It'll be used by stability. It'll be used in JOS. It may appear as a quality attribute or a parameter in criticality or something. And it really leads to this complex mess. And by the way, this is the exact same mess I see in a lot of the device world, so it's nothing new, right? Using this, what I call unstructured approach. If you look at the very top of this diagram on the right, I have a little red highlighter. If that's a particular item that is entered somewhere, it may also need to be reported in another document, and it may be referenced in someplace else. And if that item changes, I'm going to have to make sure that someone knows, hey, do you realize that item has changed? You got to go update. Or do you realize that item has changed? What impact might that have on you? Do you may need to make some new decisions? This becomes a horror show, and it leads to bad things. For example, I've seen submissions, tabulated data errors kicked back, stability, you did not, 32S73, you had mistakes in the table, health authority flagged it, kicks it back. Transcription errors, calculation errors. Even if you have good procedure controls with excellent SOPs and strong job aids, there is inherent risk in doing this manually, whether it's transcribing or aggregating from a data source like a LIMS, or whether it's actually creating new data in a spec document or doing a risk analysis like criticality. So my contention is to solve a lot of this is to use more of what I call internally structured data. The reason I put the word internally is because structured is a bit of a loaded word in the industry, right? Because we hear people talk about structured content authoring, right? Or structured data by using some sort of ontological or taxonomic meta descriptions of items, and that's all good and rigorous and happy, and will support, some of those cloud submissions down the line. What I mean is even before that, just that lowest level structuring of the actual CQA. How does that CQA behave? How does that analysis behave in stability? That's why I say internally structured. So to me, structured data item is the fundamental building block. It's something unique. I mentioned, pH or, amorphicity, whatever it might be, mostly talking CMC today. Specific data item created, it's got a unique ID, it may have attributes, it may display with a bathing suit at the beach, but it may have a tuxedo at the wedding, but it's still the same item. It may be used in more than one place in a report. That item, that measurement, that critical material attribute might appear in one row or one place as part of a report, but it may also appear somewhere else in the report, but it's the same item. It can exist over time, so it's not just something that was typed in once to Excel, Word, or whatever, but it's an item that says this is the day I was born, this is who my parents are, or my children are. This is who was able to touch me and when they did touch me, my audit logging. That's very important here. So I can follow the lifespan of this item over time. I may be reusable. I mentioned it briefly before, but if I have something that's created in a specification document, that same item may need to be used over in justification of specifications chapter. It may be used in stability, could be used in batch, could be used almost anywhere in a different report, so to speak, in a different chapter. So not even in the same, a document that I'm working on today, could be in many documents. It needs to be able to be connectable so that when I showed that risk table a minute ago for criticality, right, that I have an item that I know I could have a potential connection with what I impact, what impacts me. Do I have parents, children, peers? What kind of connections do I have? What kind of arrows do I have going between my circle and other circles? And lastly, this action at a distance means that if I am a unique internally structured data item following good data science, if I'm changed with proper authority, permission, approval, then I change everywhere. When I'm updated one time, I'm automatically updated everywhere because I'm actually the same item being seen in 100 places. I'm not copy and paste of them. I'm the exact same item. That's a critical point to this, right? That you can see how that's going to lead to a huge reduction in verification issues. Did someone go and remember to go check the other document where this pH is to make sure they updated it from 7.1 to 7.0? Don't have to worry. So sticking with my stability criticality today, just for simplicity, we can think of data mapping, if you will, or the relationships. What does it mean here, right? So I say, well, I had this thing called an analysis, and if you use some LIMS tools, they might call it a parameter, but you get the idea. It's an analysis. That's going to be associated with a lot of things you can see underneath. What are my measurements? What are my time points? What sample ID am I associated with? If my analysis, for example, are amorphicity, I may say, well, I have 3 measurements for amorphicity: concentration, crystallization, and dispersion, right? And I'm going to have 1 or more storage conditions, for this study or this run or this product. I'm going to have some number of time points that I'm going to be doing my testing period over. I'll have multiple values. I may have at one time pass, maybe some measurements are numeric. They should have 2 significant figures, whatever it might be. I have to be associated, as I said, with a batch or sample or whatever. And I may have other attributes. Maybe I need to know about the formulation, the packaging, the manufacturing site, whatever. So if I think of this as almost as an actual data map or a data item at the top with sub items below it, or a data item with several attributes below it, I could actually say for batch ABC at the 3-month point under these conditions, show me all of my measurements for different analyses, questions like that. or show me anything that is trending towards fail, and don't make me have to go into Excel and try to, hand find those things. So that's just an example of what I would call kind of a data map for maybe some stability stuff. So if I look at that more schematically here, if on the upper left, I want to make this report, and to do that, I'll probably need to ingest or find some studies, right? Some of the tests that have been done for these analyses and measurements, or parameters, if you will. So I'm going to need to get those into my report, and they're going to have their times, they're going to have their batches, their results, all this information in them, all of these attributes, if you will. And those are going to be pulled over, those same parameters or measurements, into data tables. And the data tables will have to behave certain ways and look certain ways. And they may combine storage conditions or break them out, small molecule, large molecule. In certain regions, you may have a reason to say, well, even though I have 5 significant figures, any pH is less than 5, I actually wanted to display a less than sign 5 today, but I don't want to lose the 5 significant figures that the actual test results were. So these tables need to be smart enough to be able to render that. And those tables can be part of templates with narrative and visualization and become report documents that are overall part of a deliverable. So I'm just showing a little bit of, thinking about it as a data item and connectivity approach, right? Instead of it's a report with a spreadsheet with 1,000 rows. So if I look at this very simplified table I put together, the way I made this table in the software I provide, not here today to talk specifically about what I do at Cognition, but this is one of the things we do. Once I have data in for, dissolution or color of solution or whatever, and I say I wanted to render it in a particular type of table that is predefined for me that says combined storage conditions, or flip the XY axes, display it, enter the values right here for me. I don't build the table, right? Because it's a structured data item approach, I don't need to hand make a table. I can have a template that says, this is how you're going to render it. Dissolution has 2 measurements at the 0-minute interval and at the 5-minute interval, and you'll break them down this way. If I had more than one value, because maybe I went back to LIMS over time and I said, hey guys, what's up with this, right? Well, there should be a way to flag that. Well, what are you going to do? You can't display multiple values, right? Well, you don't delete a value, but you may suppress one, right? With authority and a signature approval. So tables like this are nothing. They kind of fall out literally automatically out of using this fundamentally structured approach for these internal data items. They literally automatically can generate. I don't have to worry about it, right? I don't have to have someone go and look and say, did someone mess and put less than or equal to B4? No, because that was source data and it can't be touched, it can't be changed. It might alter its display formats at certain times, but it can't be changed. So look at recipes of, if I'm maybe the precursor to doing criticality, right? If I were doing kind of a S88 type recipe approach, where I may have many different recipes, and then I follow my PSOA approach. My process, that for each process within a recipe, this is an internally structured data item. And it may comprise stages underneath it. There may be sub-data items, if you will. And each of those stages may have or include things like equipment or parameters, other data items or attributes, depending on how you want to look at it. And stages may have operations under them that may have parameters, equipment callouts, et cetera. And each one of these is a unique item that can be picked up in your hand and used multiple times. And then maybe at the bottom is my actions if I'm doing S88, right? And I may have things like equipment again, or material definitions, or whatever I might have. And all of those things using this internally structured data item approach become very easy to handle once I take the time, it's not really that much time, but take the care to render them in this internally structured way. A little harder to see this schematic, but the way I showed a stability schematic, I'm showing a criticality schematic, right? Where I need to have a criticality analysis report at the end. So, well, I guess I need to flag these quality attributes, and I'm going to have to, be looking at these and say, are these critical or maybe critical or not? And they're going to have uncertainty or impact and all of that good stuff. And they're going to have to be put into worksheets that can be templated to say, I know what these data items are. I know how to render them in the proper way for the user to do the analysis and to be able to make reports. And of course, If I'm using a recipe, then I can trigger all of my work and my criticality based on the PSOA of the recipe. And of course, the recipe doesn't exist just once. It exists just once, but it's not just used once. It can be used in many times in many places, the same recipe. If I change the recipe somewhere, that can notify or update, so people who are using it will say, hey, guess what, there's a new action here, right? So that's just another somewhat simplified example of how you may structure criticality from a truly internally structured data item approach. So when I showed that criticality analysis table a little earlier, I said, well, here's another example of one, right? And this is not meant to be anything real. But if you look, the CQAs or the critical process parameters, whatever they are, those are all unique data items. They exist once in the database, and they may be used in many reports and many tables in many places. And if they're changed, they're going to change everywhere at the same time. So, this severity is a real attribute. This 3 is a real number. These potential probabilities, right, or uncertainties are real. They may be actual numerical entries as opposed to strings. Same with here. And leading to a residual risk. It may say, hey, this is an RPN in this case. Hey, it's 300 because I multiplied severity, probability, detectability, or whatever. That's an actual number. And then maybe it maps to a string that says it's very high and color it red. You get the idea. And maybe there's a link over to some sort of rationale or whatever it might be. So instead of this being an Excel sheet of 1,000 rows where I have to go and look and see, did somebody type severity of 7 or override the little drop down? If they're using this structured approach, they can't, right? Because the severity in this particular analysis is set as an attribute, as a value that can only be from this selection, and nobody can override it, and et cetera, et cetera. Here's an example of a recipe, right? Just a very simplified, not a real one, right? But here's this process, and there's a stage, operation, actions. There's pH. Probably should have put a lowercase p there, but if we looked at that, if we touched that, we could see that it's not just a piece of text again. That's an ID, and it may say, hey, I have more than one potential value, right? I may have this target, but I got, par, more, nor, et cetera. And these are all additional potential targets for me, right? Potential values for me that I can then analyze and start to look at for criticality. And obviously criticality is very complex. So I'm just showing one little example. The idea here is that pH is probably used in more than one section of the CTD or dossier, right? But it's a single item. And if it can be reused in analytical reports, process reports, et cetera, it really doesn't matter, right? That's part of that whole idea of that internal structure. So I could pick up the pH in my hand and see all kinds of connections to it and all kinds of who touched it and when and who approved it and all that sort of thing. One last look, a specification document, right? That might be done even, before, stability or criticality is like, well, let me do the specifications here. Well, I'm going to describe product presentations. That probably should be a data item that's going to map to, different geographic regions, right? For different markets. I'm going to have to define a product specification document about that. There'll be different sections of the document, if you will, or subsections or chapters of it, right? There may be different study types that are going to be done for specifications, different types of testing, if you will. The specifications will have attributes, values. They'll have acceptance criteria for each one. What is my my target, so to speak? Again, what do I need to be happy? I'm going to have analysis or reference to analyses that will be happening. I'll be probably looking at the QA class as well as quality attributes for each class. And they'll be connected to different methods, right? For test methods, for measurement. And if I look at the right, I put up a very, again, simplified example, like, oh, this is what that section of that document might look like, this table X thing. And I got this stuff here. And so how does that relate to this things on the left? Would I say need to be these internally structured data items with connections to make this container? This is right. Well, that attribute called general, for example, that'd be a quality attribute class, right? Just like potency or quantity, that's a QA class. It's not just a word general that's typed in a Word document. That's horrible, right? No, that's actually rendered from the database and it's fed into the system, or it's created in the system on the right, but it becomes an actual data item. That the row next to general, you can see I've highlighted the test the acceptance criteria at release, and then the test method that would be considered a specification attribute, maybe all those together. And maybe I also have stability acceptance and not just release acceptance. You get the idea. The actual test where it says, the bioassay, that would be an analysis, right? Hey, that's an analysis data item. It's a real thing. It's going to connect to things. It's going to have an owner and it's going to have a lifespan. The acceptance criteria, there it is, 70% relative to reference. The method, well, there's a method. In this case, it's probably a reference to a particular test method, right? That says, oh, this is a test method, whether that's a hyperlink or whatever, to be determined, but it's an actual real, probably a container, right? A method of how to do things. And then the last thing, I circled the whole rectangle, that whole section on the left, and really that would be the specification sections, right? That is the section that contains a lot of things in it, and there would be a lot more of these sections that become the whole product specification for the document, right? So that's one to give you a little bit of a teaser of what we mean about what is it, is it a report with stuff in it, versus actual data items or internally structured data items. This lets me do things like this. If I want to make a stability report, I have data sources wherever. I should be able to ingest them into this structured type of system, handle my transcription, handle my aggregation, apply import rules in case I have questionable or maybe not the cleanest data. Somebody put temp and someone put temperature and someone put 2 Ps, and how do I want to handle that? So that's easily handleable in these structured type systems. Apply my job aids and procedures, which should be automatically included in such a system to be able to render the data, to work with it, to set my significant figures without changing source data. Automatically generate the tables in whatever different formats needed. Deliver those tables now downstream to a doc management, to a repository, to regulatory. Critically, if you look over on the left, I put PDF last, right? Because in the ideal world, these would be done through a JSON exchange or XML or something that can handle real data. PDF is the worst because it's almost just like a JPEG at that point. More importantly, if you follow this approach, that it doesn't end here, the stability reporting, because it continues. You don't just make it once, but come back in a couple of months and you do a merge import again. Has anything changed? If we picked up new time points, I have to do an annual product review. So these are not just documents that you say it's done, but it's a kind of a dynamic living system, that follows clear processes. And then lastly, I wanted to just show this kind of example here of what I would see as one way to be a good data flow with this type of approach. I may have source systems. I'm going to ingest them. Now that's my product name, so I'm not trying to sell it, but I'm going to put it into that system that does internally structuring of data items, connectors, and containers. That's going to allow me to then feed possible one or more common data layers that I may already have, depending on my data science initiatives, which will then let me add in AI or ML, or go to R-Shiny for visualization or whatever it's going to be, spit out constant internal reports, because for every BLA, there's probably 500 or more touches internally to see how things are going, and to feed into the actual dossier. The regulatory people should not be making or looking at different tables or reports from the analytical chemist sitting in CMC. It should be the same, right? They shouldn't have to say, oh, thanks for that, now I'm going to go rework it. And now from that dossier, because we're using this as a JSON, XML, whatever, where these aren't just PDFs anymore in the ideal world, I can put that in the cloud through the Accumulus project, if anyone's familiar with that, or the FDA CASA initiative that has been been stumbling along a little bit, but is still in plan. This idea of having a true cloud gateway, right? So it's no longer a PDF that will allow a health authority through a gateway to be able to receive that quickly, accurately, and with the actual numbers that are numbers and not just PDFs. So much faster response, faster review time, obviously reduction in errors. Instead of taking 40 days to make a stability table, it might take me 15 days, and my verification is cut by 99% because of that structured approach, etc. So I will leave it at that, and I'll kick it back over to you, Kevin. If we have any time for questions, I am happy to answer a couple.
Great, appreciate that. Great presentation. Excellent detail. I'll go ahead and get the recording stopped at this point.